Mauricio, thank you for taking time out of your day to speak with us in the Mobile Home Park Mastermind series that we are doing. We really appreciate it. I know you're a busy man and you got a lot of stuff going on, but I know you have quite the brand for being a syndication attorney in all forms of real estate. So we're lucky to have you, and I think the people are going to be extremely excited to be able to speak with you and just learn from you on what you have to offer, as well as just the knowledge in general. I met you first. I don't know if you remember, but you were mobbed. You were one of the fan favorites at the real estate, the syndication event in 2019. And what was that? Dallas, Texas. Dallas, Texas.
Yeah.
And so we went in passing there and spoken a few times since then. So again, thank you for coming on. I think the best way to get started in this is just, you mentioned in the group and you caught my interest, but speak to us a little bit about, I guess, your experience with the manufactured housing mobile home park space.
Yeah, so not too many people know this, but, after not to go too back into my history, but, I temporarily moved to Belize for a couple of years and was actually running my practice from Belize. And what got me back from Belize to the U.S. was my good buddy, Andrew, Illinois, had started a mobile home park business called Four Peaks Capital Partners. And he wanted me to come on board and our other partner, Michael Ayala, to kind of run that. And so, it was probably about a year or so, or 8 months or 9 months that I was kind of in that world. So, basically raising capital for the acquisition of mobile home parks, and ended up doing, I can't remember exactly how many deals or how much money we raised in those 9 to 12 months. But, it was fun because we were traveling, I remember going to New York and kind of pitching the idea to a family office group, and just kind of learning a little bit about the business model and, and the financing and the difference between the pads and the homes themselves, and, Uncle Warren. I've got a great video. You guys should look it up on YouTube, where I went to NASDAQ and we did an interview at NASDAQ about mobile home parks. So I've got a whole thing.
Oh, cool.
What
year was this?
This was, 4 years ago, 2016 or something. And so, there's a whole, I got interviewed and I was just basically, telling the world why mobile home park was the greatest investments of all time, which they are.
I will tell you what, that story has caught on. Your message sells, because the amount of people coming out of the woodwork is looking to invest in mobile home parks. I was reached out, I don't know, yesterday from a family office in New York looking to invest now. So it's amazing how much interest.
They're like cash cows. And I remember, we were meeting with folks from Clayton Homes and, and Uncle Warren, because Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway is such a huge player in that space. So I kind of had all my bullet points, but more importantly for me, it was just, understanding the business model and certainly understanding the financing too, and what lenders were looking for and not looking for. There was a propensity of them not really that interested in, lending on the actual homes themselves. They didn't really like park-owned homes. So we had all these strategies of, how do we convert these park-owned homes into sort of, owner-occupied, and just really basically rely on the lot rents. And so anyway, and then the depreciation, which is pretty sweet as well. And they're just cash cows. Like, at the end of the day, they're cash cows. And as you guys know, the mobile is a little bit of a misnomer because they're not really, in theory, you can pick them up and move them. But at the end of the day, if somebody, if you want to evict someone or somebody doesn't pay their rent, they're not going to pick up in the middle of the night and move their home somewhere else. They're just probably going to leave it.
Yeah, exactly. And, all those things ring true today, and even more so. And I think that's why people find interest. But I think for starters for this conversation, the best way for us to maybe do this is just help frame, maybe the different buckets that we should think about when raising capital or doing or partnering with people. Maybe the broad, I'll give you the microphone for a few minutes to kind of just describe those, and then we will pull on some of those levers, and so people can just have better understandings of where they might fit within that capital raising process.
Yeah, it's funny because right before we came off, we were talking a little bit about this, and my focus is always like the first thing that I think everyone should focus on, especially if they're first-time syndicators, right? And they're looking to raise capital. The first thing they've got to focus on is, are they selling securities? Are they issuing securities? Because if they are, then you fall into this huge bucket of securities laws and securities compliance. And we all know that's a little bit of a nightmare, and it's costly and it's no fun and all that stuff. Or do you fall under another bucket, which is you're not selling a security, you're just starting a business with someone, or you're joint venturing with someone. And if we can pull off that model, then it's way better, because we don't have to worry about all the stuff that you usually hear me hammering about, 506B, 506C, advertising, all those rules. They don't really apply, because we're not issuing securities. We're just, essentially, the way I like to think of it is we're starting a business. It's like if you and I get together and we start a business together, that I'm not selling you a security, you're not selling me a security. We're just starting a business together. And that's the mentality you have to have if you're trying to avoid being a security, is starting something together where everyone's kind of actively involved, as opposed to you raising money from passive investors. And then the third bucket, which we kind of touched about, which really falls in the really kind of in the middle, but it goes back to that first question, is, are you dealing with a security? And that is the issue of these notes, promissory notes, lenders, debt. And that's just, unfortunately, that's a whole other area of law where we don't have the clarity that we really would like to have. I mean, whether a security is a note is probably the most nebulous, argued thing out there, because by definition it is a security, but you can overcome that presumption by, proving other stuff. And so there's a whole new set of rules of whether something's a note is a security or not, but that's the other bucket that you fall into. So I think you're right. You're in three buckets. You're either issuing securities, you're doing a joint venture, and then this other thing is if you have a debt partner, is that a security or not? And those are kind of the analysis that you've got to do right up front, which is why I always say it's the first thing you think about.
Yeah, that's great. And so, the world I come from, which I really want to dig into because I think it's a great model, is I do a lot of JVs on the deals that I do. But why would someone choose one over the other? So why would someone choose a JV versus a syndication? And I know there's branches of syndication, and feel free to highlight some of those too, if you'd like.
Well, typically you have a choice in structuring it, right? Whether it's a security or not, you don't get to choose. Either it is or it isn't. So, but one of the reasons you would choose the securities route, for example, what we call the syndication route, is because you don't want people making decisions. You want to make all the decisions. You're the one who found the deal. It's your baby. And you just want the capital. You don't want anybody bugging you or having to have meetings or having to ask permission for anything. You just want to make the decision, or you or one other person want to make decisions. And you want the other folks to just write you a check, go home, and don't bother you. And you just give them a return, right? Yep. That's the definition of a security. I always say that the definition of a security, it's not the official one, but the English version, is anytime you take money from investors, passive investors, where the returns are generated by your efforts, that's a security, that's a syndication. Versus, and the reason you would do a joint venture is, well, the main reason you would do a joint venture is you don't want to deal with all the securities rules and regulations. But the key there is the opposite. Now everyone has to be actively involved in the deal. Everybody needs to be making decisions. Again, think of the mentality of we're all starting a business. We're not issuing securities, we're starting a business. And so everyone has to contribute so that the returns aren't being generated by one or two people. It's being generated collectively as a group because we're all actively involved. And so by definition, you can't go too crazy with that. You can't have 20 people in a joint venture. It just doesn't work. Can you have it, 2 people? Of course. 3, absolutely. Once you get to that 4 or 5, I always cut it off at 5. I always think that 5 people is kind of the gray area. I remember way back when hearing or reading something about the SEC saying that 5 was about it. Like anything above 5, they're not going to believe you that you're all active.
Like, how can you all be active? And
how can you all be active? But to be honest with you, I've tried to go back and find that specific, citation. I can't find it, but just think about it. I mean, if you're trying to argue that there's 10 of you or 8 of you, and we're all, participating equally or not equally, but at least proportionally to, how much money you're contributing and how much effort, then it's going to be a hard sell.
Yeah. How do you say active? So active, like, what does active mean? Like, so if you say you have 4 partners, or say you and 3 others do a deal, what is active? Because if the SEC comes to you, one, why would it even be reported to the SEC unless if someone's pissed off in the partnership? And then 2, how do you even, I guess, show that someone's been active?
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. I mean, the way this becomes an issue, and that's what I think of, right? I think of worst case scenarios. That's my job. Your job is to be, enthusiastic and, upbeat.
Visionaries. Oh yeah, we don't worry about that.
My job is to prepare for the storm, and what if what hits the fan. So the issue is going to be if there's 4 of you and the deal doesn't go according to plan, or people, there's some infighting and somebody complains. I mean, they would literally pick up the phone and call, probably the state regulator or something, and that's how this would become an issue. The SEC isn't going to be, looking around and stuff. I don't even know how you would dig around. But if that were the issue, what you don't want to have is somebody who's pretending to be or thought was a joint venture. They put in 50 grand to the joint venture, and then that got lost, and then they go back and say, hey, I wasn't really doing anything. I was kind of like, I was in the meetings, right? I was kind of participating in these calls, but I really wasn't doing anything. And that's what their position is going to be, because that's what they're going to have to argue in order to get their 50 grand back. And trust me, they're not going to be on your side. They're going to be on the side of arguing, I didn't do anything. And you're going to say, well, yeah, you did all this stuff. And, they're going to paint the picture that they really didn't do anything. So actively involved simply means, doing, the returns have to be generated by your efforts. And I think if the smaller the group, the easier it is to show. So for example, somebody might be the financial guru of the group, right? So somebody may be in charge of the financials and the underwriting, or whatever. Somebody else might be boots on the ground, and they may have the relationships with the brokers and the property managers, or maybe they're managing it themselves. Somebody else might, I don't know, maybe somebody else is in charge of the investor relations.
Financing or
whatever. So it's easier when you have 2 or 3 or 4 people. Again, when you're trying to show 7 people are all active, that's where you have the problem, because now it's like, well, you're doing finance and you're doing this, you're doing that. What are you doing? Yeah.
So let's push on this even more. So how can returns be split between JV partners?
It would be, so in a JV, think about it. If you're doing a true joint venture, right? If you're starting a business, what's going to happen is 4 people are going to come together, right? And ideally everybody's going to put in some proportionate share of the capital. Right? It doesn't have to be equal. If you have 4 people, it doesn't have to be 25% each. Maybe I'm a busy attorney and I don't have time to give you that much effort, but maybe I can give you 10% of my effort. So maybe I put in 10%. Ideally, I would put 10% of the capital and put in 10% of the work and get 10% of you're splitting it up proportionally to my ownership. Where it starts getting tricky is when you start getting away from that. That's kind of the safe haven. It gets tricky when you start, well, I'm not putting as much money because I'm going to do more of the work. That's where it gets dangerous, where like, well, I'm going to be doing the heavy lifting, so I should get paid more than you, even though, it doesn't match up with the capital contributions and the percentage ownership. And that's where you start getting into trouble, because now the argument can be, wait a minute, maybe the returns are not being generated proportionally with everyone's efforts. Ian, you're doing most of the work here and you're getting 70% of the returns and you're doing all the work. And, Mauricio, is doing 10% of the work, even though he put in a quarter of the money. So ideally you want to have everybody proportionally putting in and proportionally doing the work, but it doesn't have to be equal.
It doesn't. Okay. And so when you start adding prefs and things to JVs.
Why would you do pref? Nope. Yeah. No, because now you're getting away from a joint venture. Prefs, acquisition fees, asset management. I mean, those are all syndication terms. Like if you start, why would somebody, just think about it again, you and I start a business, right? I put in capital and whatever. Why would you get a pref? Now, maybe you could do a pref. I think I would be comfortable if you did a pref to get your money out first, right? Like if I put in more money, like if I put in 50% of the money and you put in 25% of the money and somebody else puts in 25, maybe we want to get our money out first or something. And so maybe there's a pref so we can get our money out first. But in terms of returns, I wouldn't think of it as returns. I would think of them, again, in a business sense, as distributions. And typically distributions on an active business would match, they don't have to, but they typically match the ownership. And if you start doing prefs and acquisition fees and all that kind of stuff, then it gets trickier and trickier. You're now starting to blur the line, and the question will be, are you really a joint venture or are you really issuing securities?
Okay, yeah, that's all great information. So when these large players, like I talked to some of the larger private equity shops, are they doing a syndication? Like, so say they partner with an operator, but are they really doing a syndication? Or because usually they considered it a JV, right? So I've spoke to several PE shops that, want to place capital. When they raise the capital, large amounts of money, they want to place it with an operator. How do they structure those when they're trying to put out, say, they want $20 million of equity in mobile home parks to be placed in 2 years, and they partner with an operator? How are those structured in JVs, or is that more of a syndication?
Well, it depends. So, for example, when we were doing with the Ps back in our day, they sometimes have their own capital, or sometimes they're raising capital. But there's two levels to it. There's the level of the private equity. They may be raising capital. They're definitely doing a syndication into their capital. And then the question is how are they investing? Like the ones we were doing, they were basically coming in almost as debt, right? So they would come in with a big chunk of money, and we were just paying them a return. And so that was, think of it as a joint venture, really just a debt play. But a lot of times private equities, it's a joint venture because they're not day to day, but they've got some pretty big, they like to have major decisions. They want to have a say on major decisions. They're not just going to write you a check and be like, oh, I'm going to go home and do nothing. They have a lot of control. Yeah, they want controls. They want budgets. They want to make sure that if you go over a certain thing, you call them and they got to approve, and they're involved. So, and again, two people, it's just easier to show two people in that situation. So I think that's fine. My concern primarily, honestly, is when you have more than 5 people. If you have 3 or 4 people, what I would do, for example, if I had 2 people, 3 people, even 4 people, in fact, I would try and do it with all, I would set up LLCs, and I would just have everybody as a managing member, so that everybody has, by definition, everybody's got control and has decision-making ability because they're all managers, right? Right. Again, when you have one person being the manager and running the day-to-day, you just start getting further and further away from that nice.
That's a really good point. So like your LLC, because if you also do a JV, so for example, I know this is a no-no, but if you think about it, like, so if there's a promote, or say they got some incentive bonus for finding the deal or whatever, but they had majority control, right, of the LLC, is that, obviously it hedges their risk because they're not giving control to someone else to do all that work. It's still just getting into that like gray zone of syndication because you're getting like, I guess, boost of incentives to get into deals.
Again, look, I don't have a problem if you've legitimately put in more than 50% of the money and you're doing more than, and proportionally doing most of the work, then that's fine that you have the voting right. As long as you have the voting, like as long as you're actually having a vote and people are actively involved in that decision, and there's a vote. And if you want to overrule them because you have a majority vote, that's fine. But what the SEC is going to look at, if it came to that, if a regulator is going to look at, is what was the role of every single person on the team? And you better come up, not just tell them what the role is. You've got to show them what it is that you did, and it's got to add up. The story has to add up. The facts and circumstances have to make sense. So there's facts and circumstances. I'll give you a great example. This is more on the syndication side, but again, if I'm an attorney, or actually the one that works well, for example, is the engineer, right? You're a full-time engineer. You're really good with numbers. You're good at underwriting, and you basically work weekends and at night, basically, to help this JV because you got a full-time gig, right? But you're really good at underwriting and looking at properties, blah blah. So if you get 10% of that, that makes sense. I put in 10% of the money. I'm contributing 10% of the effort because I'm busy. I got other stuff. If I'm somehow getting 50% of the profits for something, that doesn't add up. The facts and circumstances of that specific thing doesn't add up. So the story has to make sense, and the further you get away from that story that makes sense, that even passes the laugh test sometimes, then the more issue, the harder it gets. And again, it's not. I know people hate this, and it is what it is. There's no black. It's not black and white. It's gray. There's sliding scales, and it really is for me a sliding scale. So you really would have to give me the specific facts and circumstances for me to be able to give you yeah, I'm comfortable with that or not. Because depending on little things like, oh, but I'm charging a sponsor fee for, if you have a sponsor fee for collecting all the money, that's going to be a big no-no. If you got a finder's fee because I found the property, that's fine. That's probably okay.
Right. And so I think what you're getting at here is these are broad structures, but this is the reason why you hire someone like yourself, because there's nuance here. And within this nuance, the importance of having good attorneys on your side is navigating this legal system, because no one cares when deals go well. It's only when shit hits the fan that, you know, this comes crashing down, and it's too late. It's way too late. Like once you've already inked the contract and you're losing money, it's like, you know, I'm sure you've gotten plenty of frantic calls where you're just like, dude, I mean, we're, you know.
Well, especially after I get a lot of frantic calls after I do podcasts, and I lay it out there, and people are like, they have the oh shit moment, and they start emailing me, oh, I think I may have done something wrong, which again is the importance of talking to somebody that can help. And on this side, you know, the JV piece, you know, isn't necessarily securities work in the sense that you could probably have a business attorney or a corporate attorney put together maybe a joint venture agreement or the operating agreement, you know, with all the terms, conditions, all that stuff. The security piece really is having somebody overseeing that to make sure that the way you're structuring it, like for example, hey, I'm going to put in an acquisition fee, that might cross the line into a securities offering. And so you just want to have somebody that you're consulting with, or that your corporate guy or gal is consulting with, so they don't, because I'll give you some examples. I've had clients, you know, and I go back and forth whether I do these. Right now, you know, we hired a transactional attorney, so she does all that stuff now. But, you know, last year, if somebody came to me and said, I've got a joint venture deal, you know, we were busy. I decided I would outsource that, right, to a transactional attorney. But then they would call me and they're like, this is really a syndication. It's like they're trying to, you know, there's one person in charge, the other people aren't doing anything. And that's why I like to keep it in-house, because then we can kind of monitor it and just make sure that, you know, this guy obviously knew syndication, so he was aware of it, but a lot of folks don't. If you've got a general attorney that's just putting together an operating agreement, they may not realize that the way you're structuring it is crossing the line over to a securities offering.
So help me understand, this is my general view, and this might be wrong to think through, but what is, and guys, drop comments in. It looks like we have a few comments coming in. So keep on dropping comments, because we will definitely answer those at the end as something comes to mind. But yeah, so I guess for syndication, kind of, do you see first-time real estate owners, or say they're in the corporate America, they decided syndication's the route that they want to take. Maybe they don't have a large track record, or they've done one or two deals. I mean, what do you see a successful syndicator? Like, kind of what are the criteria? I always thought that you kind of start as a JV and you move up to syndication, but through my conversations with you, that might not be the case.
No, I mean, we do have a lot of first-time syndicators. And look, you definitely need a track record, but it doesn't have to be a track record in syndication. I mean, if you've been doing like mobile homes, if you're a mobile home park investor and you've been, you know, acquiring parks, you know, through, you know, and you've acquired 3, 4, 5 parks, and the story's easy. It's like, hey, look, I've been doing this stuff. It's an amazing asset class. I've been killing it, but I run out of money. I need to, you know, I'm out of my own money, or I want to scale this. I'm doing well percentage wise, but I'm investing peanuts. Why not scale this and collect money? And then a lot of times people, you know, their friends and family, they hear how well they're doing and they're like, hey, I want to get in. And that's why they put together their first syndication. And what I would say is the first syndication typically should be a project-specific syndication, meaning you've identified a park and you need to go raise a bunch of money for that particular park. What's really difficult to do, although it's more appealing, which is what people are starting to do now, just because in the environment we are, is putting together a fund where they will raise the money first and then go out and look for opportunities, because especially these days, the opportunities that are coming are going to be in favor of people who can just close quickly, have the cash, you know, all cash or whatever the situation is. And so, but a lot of my first-time syndicators, they'll do a project-specific, and a lot of them will start smaller. They may only raise $700 or $1 million or whatever. And look, I know sometimes mobile home parks aren't that expensive, and so you just have to I would do a portfolio. I would buy 2 of them instead of 1, because it's probably
what's the kind of break even for you? That was a question. Like, what does it take to set up a syndication or fund? Like, at what point would it not make sense? So say you have a $500,000 deal, like what would it make sense for you to not do a syndication, maybe kind of considered a JV?
Again, you don't have a choice, in the sense that if you're doing the passive route, you know, it's either, the question is, do you do it or you don't do it? I mean, again, the joint venture, you'd have to have everybody actively participating. But I have had people call me like, I want to raise $200,000 or I need $150,000 or something. And look, there's a compliance cost, right? The compliance cost is going to run you anywhere from, let's say, $10,000 to $15,000. right? So if you're raising 150 grand, 150 grand, that's a 10% load. You know, that's a lot. That's probably not going to work. $1 million, it's the same amount. So if you look at the percentage just goes down. If I raise $1 million and spend 10 grand, that's 1% versus if I raise 100 grand and spend 10 grand, that's 10%. So I think this, in general, I think the sweet spot, not the sweet spot, but the minimum you're looking is probably generally it's 600-700 grand for it to make sense. But that doesn't mean it. Look, with mobile home parks, because I know, especially if you're buying a distressed park that's got like 20% occupancy and you're going to go in there and fix the homes and turn this thing around, you just got to reverse engineer it. You got to put in the compliance costs and see if the numbers make sense. It may make sense at 300 grand because it's such a great, you know, the value add is so huge. Or maybe you want the experience. I mean, maybe it doesn't make sense, but at least you go through the motions and now you've got your first one under your belt. But that's the first thing I talk to people when they call me and they're like, hey, I'm looking to raise 300 grand. The first things out of my mouth is just make sure you underwrite it with that compliance cost and see if it still makes sense, because it may not make sense to spend 10, 12, 15 grand to do a syndication if the numbers don't. It usually kills your deal.
Right. Okay. So at least, I mean, again, it's all this stuff. It's really hard in real estate because everything's so deal specific that, you know, you can say general guidelines, but they can be broken all the time. But you're saying, you know, $500,000-$600,000 and up is kind of the baseline, but don't just write it off, especially if you're going for passive money, because that's only
if you only need a couple $100 grand, then maybe you go find 1 or 2 people and you do a joint venture, or maybe you find 1 investor and you do a note or something.
Let's talk notes real quick, because that's interesting. That's an interesting because I'm trying to give people all the options that they can do. They can have all active JV. We have the syndication model, which there's multiple types where we can talk about that. But for the note, maybe that's an option for someone where, how would they set something up like that? And what does that even look like? Just in let's go as kindergarten as we can, right? Just so people get the general sense. And then if they have deal specific questions, then, they can consult with you potentially for a partnership.
Yeah. I'm actually working on right now a piece that I'm going to probably release independently too, just on promissory notes, because that's probably the one area it's just a mess out there, to be honest with you. So in general, promissory notes by definition are securities. It's actually if you look at the definition under the Securities Act of what a security is, it'll say right there in the second or third one, it's promissory notes, including promissory notes. So the presumption whenever you have a note is that it's a security, but you can overcome that presumption if you can show certain things. The easiest one to show is a note that's less than 9 months, for example. So if you're doing a fix and flip, right, where you only need the money for 2 or 3 months or 5 months or 6 months, you could do a 6-month note. One person can't fractionalize it. And that by definition would not be a security because it's kind of a lending arrangement, right? But anything over 9 months by definition is a security, but you can overcome it. And we call it again, not to get into it, there's a family resemblance test. Like there's certain things that by definition are not that they're not a security, that you can overcome them. And it's usually because there's licensing things. So for example, a hard money lender or a lender who has a license is not going to be considered a security. It's going to be considered a commercial loan. That's why the banks aren't issuing, you're not issuing securities to Wells Fargo for your mortgage, because that's one of the not the exemption. I guess it is technically an exemption, but it's because they're licensed. They have a banking license. They got all kinds of other regulatory stuff they got to do with. And same thing with sort of a hard money lender or something. But other than that, you really have to find these family resemblance tests. And even then it gets a little funky. And honestly, some jurisdictions, I've seen court cases where they found that, a loan, is not a note, and then I've seen other jurisdictions that say it ends up being a note. So it's really tricky. I think the safest way to go, and it's still not super clean, but if you have one lender and it's secured by real estate, then you have that argument. That's one of the family resemblance tests, and by real estate I mean first position. I mean if you default,
sell or carry.
Yeah, certainly a sell or carry, but essentially, if you defaulted for whatever reason on the note, that I would end up with the real estate. So it's just kind of a structural thing, but at the end of the day, it's very similar to me buying real estate. It's just on
which would be really difficult if you have recourse debt or, you know, other options on most property, just because if you're, you know, you can't have two first, the bank's never going to allow you to have two.
No, right. And second, like I would like to have it in first position. A second position lien is already tricky. And certainly if it's a non-secured, that gets tricky too. But you know, the way I like to do it, to be honest with you, if look, one of the easiest things you can do from an economic, because a lot of time it's economic, right? That's one of the big issues, right? It's just the economics of it, you know, spending the money if you're not raising that much capital. One of the things that you can kind of fix a lot of this stuff is just by sticking to accredited investors. So an accredited investor, just a quick summary here, it's basically high net worth individuals, right? Anybody who has $1 million in net worth, excluding their primary residence, or they've earned $200,000 a year for the last 2 years with a reasonable expectation of earning that this year. And if you're married, it's 300 grand. I prefer to just call it a security, and because they're accredited, one accredited, two accredited, the level of compliance, not the level of disclosures that we have to give is very minimal when you're only dealing with accredited investors. And so with a promissory note, I prefer to just call it a security, do a 506B or whatever, and we do a promissory note. We throw in some standard, you know, risk disclosures in there, but you don't have any obligation to give an accredited investor a private placement memorandum, or in this case, you wouldn't even have an operating agreement because they're just giving you a note. So a promissory note with some risk factors, file your Form D. It's one investor. It'll be one state, wherever state they're in. You're going to file, you know, pay a couple $100 or $500, and I say, and to me, that's the way you get around it. And not get around it. It's the way that I sleep well at night, knowing that we're not arguing whether it's a security and not security. There's no risk there. I'm calling it a security. You're accredited. I'm not required to give you a PPM. I'll give you some docs, but I won't go crazy. I'll follow my Form D, and we're done. The challenge is when people say, yeah, but I've got non-accredited. And that's the challenge. The minute you have a non-accredited investor, now you're required to give them all the disclosures, the full enchilada of risk disclosure, which is a full-blown private placement memorandum, which is what's the expensive part. But if you can limit yourself to accrediteds only, that's the way I sleep well enough. I think if you do a note secured in first position, I've got a good argument that it's not a security. Yeah. But if you want to sleep well at night, I would just call it a security and just do it, you know, and that's, again, pretty standard because there's no huge, it's a promissory note. It's not that complicated, right? I'm lending you money. You're giving me interest rate. It's secured by an asset. So you want to talk a little bit about the asset, but that's the way I like to do, you know, promissory notes.
Okay. And so from all this stuff, you know, I'm just going to be nosy here. Like when things go bad, the way most people get in trouble is these investors are so upset that they're reporting it to someone that's then getting people to look in. So for example, the SEC is not going to come knocking on your door and say, hey, Ian, I hear you're doing some JVs and mobile home parks. I just kind of want to look in your books. Is more they're more reactive than proactive, or do they have like a dollar figure they're going after where they go after, like how do they think through this? No,
I mean, usually look, the SEC is pretty understaffed, so they're not going after everyone. I mean, there definitely would be, you know, I always say your biggest risk is the state regulator. Because they're kind of twiddling their thumbs. They don't have much to do anymore because we preempted and taken all their rights away. But no, the SEC, look, I did a cryptocurrency fund, and that's a hot button, right? So that was only like $1 million, and that got flagged, and we went through the audit, and every audit we've done has been great. So that was fine, but that got flagged. And then I think if you're somebody who's out there in the public, you know, doing, you know, stuff and you're kind of aware, then I think that it's easier for you to get caught from the SEC. You might have somebody listen to a podcast and, you know, maybe just listen to the podcast and say, hey, they may have a friend who's a regulator and just kind of snitch on them. I think that's happened too, because I know of some SEC investigations that, you know, just happened in the last couple of years. I can't imagine anything's has gone wrong. But generally speaking, the way these things happen is the investor is upset. They've lost money. Usually they've lost money. You know, like technically, I guess you can make money and still complain. But generally, when you're getting paid and there's a return, no matter how blatant your violations have been, there's the golden rule defense, right? So as long as you're performing, it's great. But when you lose money and the investor loses money, what happens is they pick up the phone. They may call the SEC and get blown off by the SEC, so then they call their state regulator. So I'm in California, you call the California Department of Corporations. If you're in Texas, you call it Texas Securities Board. And that typically generates an audit. So somebody gets assigned to the case and they'll send you a nice little letter, say, hey, they don't give you too much details of the person complaining, but they're like, hey, it's come to our attention, blah, blah, blah. Please send us all of these documents. And they give you a whole laundry list of docs. Send me all of your offering documents, send me everything that you provided these investors. And in my experience, if you've been working with a securities attorney, and even if you've lost money, and the securities attorney hands over all the disclosure docs, right, the business plans, the PPM, it's like hundreds of pages, and everybody's signed, everything's clean, then they go away. It's like, honestly, most of the time they don't even follow up because they see that they're looking for low-hanging fruits, that you've crossed your T's, dotted your I's, they move on. What they're looking for is when they ask for that information, you don't have anything. You don't have a PPM. Well, why not? Because that's where the next steps happen. And typically, there's a next phase. There'll be subpoenas. There'll be, not really depositions, but oral examinations, and then they'll make a decision as to whether, typically a lot of these get settled. But the main risk, even though I'm known, I get a little bit dramatic just because I want to emphasize it. So I have the thing about staying out of jail. Yeah. The reality is, unless you're committing fraud, you're not likely going to go to jail. But it's serious, and that's why I really wanted to use that, because I think a lot of people are just kind of willy-nilly kind of ignoring things, and that's no big deal. The penalties for violation of these, so if you end up doing a joint venture and it turns out you're wrong and it's a securities offering and you've violated securities laws, the main consequences are, number one, the rescission rights, right? So you're going to be guaranteeing those investors money. Like if they gave you $100,000, you're going to have to return the $100,000 plus interest, even if it wasn't your fault. Meaning they lost the money not because of anything you did. Maybe there was a global pandemic and suddenly, whatever. But because you violated securities laws, you're going to be required to do the restitution and give them their money back, which typically means you don't have it, because if you've lost the money, you don't have it. So you end up filing for bankruptcy is what typically happens. And then maybe more importantly, if this is a line of business that you're seeking, is you'll be basically barred from being able to raise capital anymore, in that particular state, if it's a state issue or if it's an SEC level at all, because there's a bad actor provision now on all these exemptions. And so if you've committed a bad act, and one of those would be violation of securities laws, then you would be barred to act as a sponsor moving forward.
Okay, and so that great information. I think a lot of people it seems like they're enjoying this. And so one thing is, when you're starting out, you don't have much capital. How do you find your way into real estate deals? Right? So you don't have a lot of capital, but you're good at finding deals. So you can wholesale stuff. You can, put things together with people. You can partner with people. But how would you recommend in a legal way that you've seen people do very successfully? Because I know you work with a lot of syndicators. How are people able to, say, start from nothing and really make it in real estate by, playing by the book?
Yeah, so a lot of first-time syndicators will piggyback, right? They'll find a more experienced syndicator, and they'll just basically offer their, hey, I'm learning, I want to get into it. A lot of, I'm part of a lot of these groups, so a lot of these groups have a lot of new-time syndicators, and so a lot of times they'll piggyback. So they'll maybe only for 10% of the deal, but they'll go in and do all the work for them and really bust their butt, and they may not get as much of a return, but it doesn't matter. They're there for the experience. Get that resume under their belt, maybe do that 1 or 2 times, then they can go off on their own, because now they can show, hey, I've raised a bunch of money, even though they weren't the lead sponsor, they were part of the legitimately part of the sponsorship. So that's one way to do it. And the other way is just, look, the art of raising capital is an art in and of itself, and everybody's got different opinions. The way I typically recommend syndicators to find capital is, number one, always be looking for capital. You don't want to be finding a deal and then, okay, I've got a deal, let me go find the money, right?
Yeah, where's everyone at?
Where's everyone? I got to go raise $500,000. Where do I go? You got to be constantly going to meetups, going to seminars. Social media is a great, be careful with social media, but value add. Let's
talk through that. I think that's really, because I think that's relevant to everyone in terms of value add. I post a ton of stuff on LinkedIn. A lot of just, random stuff that I'm doing within book stuff. But I also realize there's some no-nos.
Yeah, a lot of no-nos. Yeah. Let me tell you what you can do. Let me tell you what I would do. I would look what you do. I mean, you're doing it. So what I would do, especially in the mobile home park space, because not too many people know about mobile homes, or if they do, they have this conception that it's, you know, trailers and they've got this, you know, ill-conceived, they don't know Warren Buffett's the biggest player in the space. They don't know all this stuff. Write a report why mobile home parks is the greatest real estate asset class of all times, and go watch my NASDAQ video and just because I have all the bullet points, I have all my talking points on that one. We should find it. I don't know. I got to put it on my website.
We should find it and put it in the group.
Here are the reasons why, you know, it's recession resistant. You know, Uncle Warren is a big player. You know, I remember, you know, it's leverage, it's real estate, like whatever the stuff is. And do a lead magnet. Hey, I've got this great report. If you're interested, give me your email and I'll give you this report. Now you have an email address or a contact information from the stranger, right? Now there's a process that you can take them through where you take them from a complete stranger that you just met at a seminar or a meetup or a webinar or on social media or whatever. There are actually, I just did a little thing today on it. There's 8 steps that you can follow. One of the few times the SEC has given us really good guidance. Usually it's all this gray area. We don't know this is like, here are 8, I used to say 7. It's 8 steps that if you follow these 8 steps, you're taking this individual from a complete stranger to having what's called a substantive relationship with that person. And once you establish that substantive relationship, you then can offer them a future deal. You can't offer them a deal you're currently working on because you have to have a pre-existing substantive relation, meaning pre-existing your deal. But once I got to know Ian, we've talked on the phone, I know your level of sophistication, you know what I'm doing, we kind of know each other, no magic time, but basically we just fostered this relationship. And I'm like, great, today is the day that I have a substantive relationship with Ian, then the next deal I have, I can offer you that deal. So the best time to be raising money, or not raising money, adding people to your list is either in between deals, when you don't have a deal, or if you've never raised before, then the first thing you should be doing is starting to get people on your list. Just adding people, having a list of people that you can, an audience, is critical. And now it's so easy these days with social media and, you know, LinkedIn and Facebook, or these webinars are a great way to get people on your list, or podcasting is a great, easy way to get people on that. There's just a ton of ways without advertising, without talking about a deal, without promising returns, without doing anything. You can get people on your, as my friend Kyle Wilson would say, on your wheel. And then once they're on your wheel, you can then start giving them more value add, more, you know, things, and teaching them about mobile home parks. Again, if I don't know anything about mobile home parks, teach me like why, you know, how it works, and tell me Uncle Warren is a big player and why, you know, because that to me was a big one. Once people heard that, you know, Warren Buffett's involved, it was like, oh, wow, it must be something that I probably should pay attention to, because if Uncle Warren's doing it, then
that's all I need to hear. I'm all in.
That's all I need to hear. I'm in, right? And if you're telling me, you know, I used to use the term recession resistant, because my argument was, you know, A's go to B, everybody gets compressed down. But, you know, when you're in a mobile home or affordable housing, like, next step down is you're living out of your car, and the next step you're homeless. Like, there's nowhere lower to go. So I argued that your demand for your product actually increased in a recession because everybody gets compressed down and there's nowhere else for you to go.
And I think that's true today. I mean, we're seeing that today. I mean, just
affordable housing, there's such a shortage of affordable housing. I used to talk about also about, you know, just the people don't, you know, the zoning for mobile homes is so difficult because nobody wants a mobile home in their neighborhood, right? So the demand is there, but the supply isn't quite there. Anyway, there's all these arguments. Yeah,
all this stuff is things you can post on social media. Like I posted recently about water collection, how, you know, brokers just talk about water collection, how it's usually not 100% because you have water leak lines. And I show videos of me walking through mobile homes just saying these are things you need to look out for. So education invaluable. What you can't do is say, oh, just got an 80 lot park under contract.
That's exactly right. A checklist is great. Hey, I'm walking through this property, blah, blah, blah. Hey, I've got this 15-point checklist that I use every time. If you want a copy of my checklist, email me and I'll give it to you. Boom, you've got somebody's email, and now you can start that relationship. But what you cannot do is, clearly you cannot blatantly, well, if you're doing exemptions that do not allow advertising, there are exemptions that allow you to advertise all day long. So if you're using one of those, then this doesn't apply. But if you're relying on these 506B exemptions, which 95% of people rely on, then you can't go on social media and say, hey, I just got in a contract for an 80-unit apartment complex. I'm raising $500,000. If you're interested, you know, I think I'm going to be able to get 12% returns. If you're interested, call me or email me or click on this link. That would be a no-no, I think, pretty obviously. But where most people get hung up on is the conditioning the market. So conditioning the market is also potentially considered an offer and therefore potentially advertising. And conditioning the market means anything that you're posting that drums up interest for your particular offering, for your deal. So it may be indirect, you're walking your property, on your due diligence trip, and you're doing videos, and you have you're actively raising for it, and people can just tell, or you're implying that you have an active deal and you're looking for investors, call me if you're interested. Bragging about returns, promising returns, or talking about all that kind of stuff can be conditioning the market. I think that's where people get into trouble, which is why my general counsel is, if you have an active deal where you're raising money for a deal right now, I would just stay off social media about relating to that. I mean, you can post about your cat and your kids and all that stuff, but just don't try and get cute with it, because again, we go back to gray area where the SEC could look at a post. Again, not directly, I think, on the back end, but they could look at a post and look, you really were kind of getting people excited about it. I know you didn't talk about your deal specifically, but clearly, when I'm reading this post and looking at the pictures, I can tell you have an active deal, and that's going to be conditioning the market.
Anything deal related, or like, hey, I'm going to check out some new opportunities, anything that would prompt someone to say, I want to invest with you, I guess explicitly, or anything is off limits. I guess here's a question. If you aren't raising money, right? So say you just have JVs and you're just like, I'm excited about this deal. And honestly, everyone knows this. The reason why people post stuff, because I post a lot on social media, the reason why people post on Twitter and LinkedIn that they got a deal under contract, it gets the most amount of likes. It's just like the engagement photo, the baby photo, the X, Y, and Z, the success photo of social media. If you're not actually raising capital now, but say in a year from now you do, and you decide to do a 506C, are you in trouble?
If your future deal is a 506C?
Yeah.
No, because a 506C, you can advertise, you can condition the market, you can do, kind of whatever you want.
So you could.
You got to be a little bit careful. I'm sorry. You got to be a little bit careful when I always say you can do whatever you want, which is true from an advertising standpoint, because your 506C allows you to advertise, but there's still the anti-fraud provisions under there. So you still want to be careful about. I wouldn't post too many details, exact numbers on your. I wouldn't be like, hey, I've got a deal. We're going to make 12% or 15% annualized or 20% annualized.
So just don't put returns at all.
Yeah, or put a range. Or what I like to do is, hey, there's a great deal. We're under contract. We're looking to raise money. We need $1 million. You can maybe even say, look, returns are in the whatever, but then give them a link, and the link gives them more. Have them click on the link, and the link then has the more of the information, all of the, not just the good stuff, but some of the bad stuff, and then some disclaimers in there.
So I'm going to keep pushing a little bit on social media, because I think a lot of people do it. So if you are posting anything related to conditioning the market X, Y, and Z, but if you are just doing JVs specifically with active partners, you're not in trouble. But the second you get into passive partners and you don't, correctly set up your documents with someone like you, and also just the overall deal process. I know you just don't do deal documentation. Like you do a lot, you do a holistic approach of everything there, and use a 506B, that's an issue. And then if you don't do it correctly, if you just have passive investors with nothing, which is the biggest no-no, that's a huge issue as well. But if you go 506C, even if you conditioned the market today and did it in 2 years, there's no issue for you to have.
I had a call today with a really well-known syndicator, and that was the discussion we were having. The syndicator is using social media, and it's kind of closed. It's like, is it conditioning the market? Is it not? Like, I don't know. And I'm like, you're taking accredited, because that's the limitation on 506C. You can only take accredited investors. But he was taking accredited investors anyway, only. So I'm like, why don't we do a 506C? There's all these landmines that are out there. If you're trying to do a 506B that does not allow you to advertise, but you're on social media, it's like you've got to navigate these landmines and do it perfectly. And even then, who knows? There's a risk of something happening.
I guess why would you do the B over the C? And maybe, we'll step a little bit back and then answer some questions. The real snapshot difference between the B and C, and why are people going B when the C exists?
The 506B allows you to take non-accredited investors, sophisticated investors, but that they're non-accredited, up to 35. That's the main reason, right? But if you're going to go that route, you really have to limit yourself to people in your sphere, people, your friends, your family, the people you already know, the people you already have a substantive relationship. So if you're out of those people, either you don't have anybody, Or maybe you do have a bunch of people, but now you're on raise number 7 and they're all tapped out and you need more new people. That's when you consider advertising and going on. Or if you're really good at social media and marketing and being able to put up great content out there, and you've got a follow, you got a YouTube channel, or you've got, look, Grant Cardone is a great example, right? Grant Cardone has a humongous following. He does 506Cs and Reg A's because they both allow you to advertise. But why wouldn't you do that when you've got that audience? And so that's why you do a 506C, is because you want to expand your audience, or you want to get more people. Most of the time, when people are beginning anyway, they want their Aunt Karen in the deal, and Aunt Karen is non-accredited. And so that's why they do 506Bs.
Got it. Okay. That's a good distinction. That's definitely a good distinction to make. I guess, is there anything mobile home specific for syndications that we should keep in mind? Mobile home park?
No, on one-on-one, we had some creative structuring, but that's not really syndication. Just trying to, we at some point would separate the pads from the homes and did some, interesting structures but not from a security standpoint. Again, securities is the same. Like, there's two things you're doing. You're raising money on the one hand, and then you're deploying the money on the other hand. Whether you're deploying that on mobile home parks and the stock market, and the raising capital is the same. You're relying on an exemption, or it's a joint venture, or whatever you're relying on. The raising the capital is the same. Once you deploy it somewhere, you may need a license to do, like if you're going to invest in the stock market, you may need a Series 7 license. You might be an investment advisor if you're buying securities. But the raising of the capital, all the rules apply there. Is it a security? Is it not a security? Is it a note? Is it all that stuff?
Got it. Okay. And then I think we have a few questions that we'll go into, and I have a few more as well. For whatever reason, it only is showing a few of the questions. What can we say on social media?
God, I've never actually checked out
Yeah, we're on a little bit of a delay, but I guess, is a fund more difficult than a syndication? I'm guessing he's asking, is a fund more difficult than probably a deal?
Yeah, I just did a video. If you want to check out, I have a YouTube channel, which I try and drop, and I'm going to be dropping a lot more videos there. But my last video I did was how to do a fund, because it's just a hot topic. Like 80%, 90% of the calls I have now are funds. People wanting to look at funds. But yes, if my answer is always, if everybody could do a fund, everybody would do one. It's almost like the asset protection. If everybody could afford an asset protection trust, everybody would do it. On the asset protection trust is a cost issue. But on the fund, the difference is when you're doing a fund, the investor doesn't have a mobile home park to look at. They don't know the numbers. They don't know where it's at. They don't know the occupant. They can't see your underwriting and then make adjustments to your underwriting. They're literally betting on you. They're giving you their money, and they're trusting that you can go out there and do whatever it is you're going to do. As if that's harder. It is. You've got to have.
You say you need a track. Yeah, you need a pretty strong track record for something.
Yeah.
So for a deal-by-deal syndication, I think someone just asked, what's the best way to structure your first mobile home park deal? I have a deal in a contract and need money to close, which just FYI, that kind of is against what we're speaking about with social media. You can't advertise that you need money unless, I guess, if you do an active partner or an active business within a
or you do a 506C, right? So those are the other ways.
Or 5 or 6C. I guess the biggest thing for people, say they know some people with money, or they're building relationships with people with money. I think the first deal, say you don't have much real estate experience at all. Say you don't have really any, but you have a couple people who have money in your network. Is that the best path to close your first mobile home park deal? If, say, for example, you've talked to maybe the operators that you've talked to doesn't want to do this deal, but you have a lot of belief in it. In terms
I've never done it before. Why? I'm not giving my money to anybody who's this is my first rodeo. I have no idea what I'm doing. I've just read it in a book, or I've gone to a seminar, and I kind of I think if you're in the mobile, and with mobile home parks, there are certainly plenty of mobile home parks that are relatively inexpensive. There's just smaller pad numbers, right? We were always looking at 100 plus, but there's pads that have 20, 25, so they're relatively inexpensive. So either those you should do either on your own to start to get the track record, or maybe again partner, find somebody. I mean, you've got a great network here. People are interacting. Like, hey, have an experienced person who's willing to bring somebody else on and take on some of the heavy lifting and help out, so you get some experience that way. Or just do maybe as debt. Sometimes people start off. Not that I hugely recommend this, but I mean, if you've got, well, I guess you're saying if you have no money. But the other thing is you just like, look, just give me a loan. I'll pay you 12% interest. I'll personally guarantee the loan. Like, I'll pay you back. And then that way it's, I owe you the money no matter what, whether I get this deal done or not. But to not have any mobile home or any real estate experience and then go ask for somebody for their money is that's going to be a main disclaimer on your docs, right? Assuming you're doing, I guess if you're doing a joint venture,
they would have the control. So I guess from my perspective, from an operations perspective, who is obviously different than an attorney, just like find a way to get shit done, right? Like that's the way kind of we're thinking through things is that's why I think JV makes a lot of sense for your first few deals. And the reason why is, one, you don't have a track record to raise passive money. Like if you do the securities route, like go that route, because who's going to believe in you if you don't have it? But, people have certain relationships, maybe friends and family, but even still, that's a whole nother discussion, because that comes with its own baggage as well. Right. But to get into the game is, one, partner with someone who's done it, or two, do a JV to get started.
I think that's right. Yeah.
And then after that, maybe you've done a deal too, and that was successful. Then from there, you can really push on going the passive investment route in securitization and syndication route. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to get people behind you. Like you said, your guttural reaction was like, why the hell would I invest with you if you don't even know what you're doing?
And I think that's fair. I think especially if you go with a smaller park to kind of get your feet wet, and then you partner with two other people who are either a little bit more experienced, or maybe the three of you have no clue what you're doing. So the three of you are going to learn together and follow whatever. But start with your own thing, or partner with somebody who has experience. And that's how, but again, if I'm going to start that again, if it's three people, I would really try hard to make sure, ideally, all of you are third. Everybody puts in a third of the money. Everybody's a third. Just like everybody's a third. That makes it clean, and that's how you can definitely get some experience. Again, there's so many parks that are so relatively inexpensive, right? At least to acquire. I mean, you've got obviously some value add. Not some value, the construction part of it and fixing up these dilapidated homes and putting a fence around stuff and getting all the drug dealers out sometimes. But anyway, so there's some capital intensive stuff, but I don't know. I think you've got to get experience somewhere, somehow.
Right. Or even just working for someone, or like find some ways to get creative. Some people wholesale many deals to build a lot of capital. So then they can kind of put in a more substantial portion into it. So, I mean, just the people who really want to get it done, find a way to get it done. Yep. So phrasing this as looking for a joint venture partner versus need money would be okay. Yeah. So need money, I guess the way I view this is, when you say need money, if you're looking for passive partners, and you don't have a 506C, you have to have a substantial relationship before you even go down that path. Right.
Only if you're doing a B. If you're doing a 506C, you can advertise. You don't need a relationship. You can find some guy, random person off the street. But if you're looking for passive investors starts to get problematic, because by definition, you're now issuing securities.
Yeah, correct.
So now you're trying to figure out, well, how do I do this the least expensive way possible? Do I do it, how do I do it with non-accredited? It just gets tough. It just gets tough. Because with non-accredited, you have to give them all the disclosures. And so it just gets really challenging in smaller deals when you have non-accredited. So I think if you have non-accredited, I'm sorry, you're talking about passive. Sorry. If you have passives, it's a security by definition. So,
right. So you have to do a 506C if you're asking on social media by default to stay out of trouble. And then two, how long does that process take? So if you're doing a security, like what's the process to kind of setting up your PPM and your...
We have a really, I'll do a little plug here, because we have I think the fastest turnaround speed around. So, once you, we'll send a questionnaire out. once you send us the questionnaire back along with some kind of a business plan, we get stuff done in about a week.
Wow.
Now the whole process, that's just on the legal stuff. So, I mean, but then you got to review it and you got to, so there's time that you got to put together your business plan on the front end. So that may take a while, but once we have all the info and you don't change your mind, we can bang out docs in about a week. Then, you take a couple days to review them. I mean, we could be done in, less than 2 weeks. And then of course you got to go, start the process of marketing and raising the capital, which may take months.
But I mean, that's within a due diligence time frame. You're not talking.
Oh, sure. Yeah. That's why I want people, you should definitely be calling your attorney early. And you don't want to wait till, I've heard some people teaching this where, wait till you pass due diligence and you're moving forward before you spend any money. And I get it, but by then it may be too late. You may have already blasted some stuff on social media, and then you're like, okay, well, let's do a 506B, and we're going to be like, well, you can't because you already blew it. Right. So you want to reach out early. We have plenty of sort of credits that we give. So if you retain us and then you don't do anything, you pull out, then we'll just credit you to the next one. So it's not like we're taking your money and you're going to have it do it again. But the one that takes the longest is, which I don't we have time to get into, is if the Grant Cardone style Reg A or Reg A Plus, those are the ones that take 6 to 7 months and they cost, 60, 70, 80 grand. So that's another thing.
That's a very small percentage of people who actually would be able to execute.
For the Reg A Plus, nobody did. I mean, there was 5, I think there was 5 Reg A's that were done before, nobody would, because why would you? But now with Reg A Plus, it's getting a little bit more, it works for funds. So if you want to put together a mobile home park fund, you're going to go raise $10 million to go buy a portfolio of mobile home parks over the next 3 years, then the nice thing about Reg A is once you get it through the process, and that's why it's expensive because you got to basically get it mini registered with the SEC, you can advertise, which is nice, and you can take non-accredited investors, which is really nice.
Okay. Cool. Well, let's look at someone asked to post the link for YouTube on how to create a fund. I'm guessing that's just within your name.
Yeah, maybe. I'll go on there, assuming I can do that. If not, I'll send it to you. Yeah. You can either just go to YouTube and just plug my name in. It's probably the most
searched video,
either the first or second most searched video. But if not, I'll just put a link on the comments after we're done.
Awesome. Well, you gave so much awesome information that I think a lot of people learned a lot tonight. I would love to give you a few minutes just to kind of speak. I would love for you to just kind of speak a little about your firm and how you all do things, because I think there's people in this group that could really use the services and the guidance and the counsel that you obviously offer, and maybe ways that people can connect with you, and we can put that in the comments as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I mean, I'll put something in the comments. I mean, I'm an SEC lawyer, so all I do is syndication stuff. And then we've got our real estate transactional attorney that can certainly help on the transaction side. But, we've got a pretty unique process. We spend a lot of time on the front end of the consulting with this 1 week turnaround, which is really a big deal. I do asset protection, so I'm really good with consulting and putting structures together. But I'll put my contact info. You can always find me through the website. But honestly, if you want to really still connect, the YouTube channel would be a good place. I'm going to start posting a lot of stuff there. And then just, follow me on Actually, I'm not on Instagram. Either LinkedIn or Facebook are the two places that you can grab me. And I'm always putting out content there. So that's probably the best way. And if anybody wants to connect with me and do a consult, if you're thinking about raising capital and you want, a little bit more details, then you can just, go through the website premierlawgroup.net and just find me there. And then the one thing I'll post there, just because I want content, I'll give you guys content, is if you email social, I forgot about this, social@premierlawgroup.net, social@premierlawgroup.net, that'll get you a 5-part video series I did on how to use social media, kind of what we talked about today, how to use social media properly to add to your list, essentially, like how to use social media to raise capital. And so just social@premierlawgroup.net, and that'll just automatically forward you the 5-part video series.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mauricio. You dropped so much good knowledge. I think you helped a lot on the JV aspect, which a lot of people consider, and just what's right and wrong within that, as well as speaking through a lot of the kind of the nuances on social media and just thinking through correctly on how to even get started, which is really important, because a lot of people are like, oh, a lot of money. I don't know where to go. I kind of fold, like I'm done. Like I can't go further. So we had 15 comments and more people are going to be coming in.
I'll go in there too. I mean, I'll go in there if you guys want to if you're watching this afterwards, if you want to just tag me and I'll go in there and answer questions. If you guys have follow-up questions, I'm happy. That's what I like to do. I like to do this stuff anyway.
Perfect. We'll do that. And then I will get everything else to you over email. But thanks so much. And we're going to sign off from Facebook Live now. But thanks so much. And feel free to drop comments from Mauricio. Let me see. All right. I just stopped the